Hey everyone, welcome back. We're in chapter 10, and this one's about social protest and affirmation. So this is Cildo Mirles, Insertions into Ideological Circuits, Coca-Cola Project, Brazil, 1970. It's a screen print on Coca-Cola bottles. Many artists protest injustice with their artwork. They identify villains, honor heroes, promote causes with emotional and visual impact. Protest art is a form of affirmation because it is based on respect for human dignity and the belief that change is possible. This is Goya, the executions of May 3rd, 1808 in Spain. In 1814, oil on canvas. Goya did a lot of very horrific kind of scenes. Very intense, very intense. Protest against military action. So artists have depicted war and glorified the victors and shown the defeated. 200 years ago, artists began to make art protesting a particular war or welfare altogether. Much of past art was made for victorious political or religious leaders, and warfare was a means to gain power. Art was a way to display that power. In the executions of May 3rd, 1808, the citizens of Madrid rose up against Napoleon's army. The rioters were executed outside the city. In this image, Goya depicts Spaniards facing the firing line. The man in white, arms outstretched, is like Christ crucified. The soldiers' repeated poses, hidden faces are dehumanized, and the barrels of pointed rifles are rigidly organized, a war machine. Painted from sketches the artist made of the actual event, this work was a protest against Napoleon's occupational army in 1808 Madrid. Goya individualized the Spaniards trembling, praying, or protesting as they faced the firing line so that we identify with their horror. This is Kathy Kollwitz, The Outbreak, Losbrook, Germany, 1903. It's an etching. Keith? I don't know if it's, I'm sure it's a man. Kollwitz dedicated, she, okay, my bad. Keith Kollwitz dedicated her work to ending war and poverty. She lost her son and grandson during World War I and World War II. In her artwork, she turned to the past conflicts to show the destructive energy of war. That's really good. I didn't know about her. This work depicts an uprising in the 16th century peasant war in Germany, one of 7 prints to show the destructive energy of war. Kollwitz shows a woman leading the revolt, breaking old stereotypes about women's passivity, and the uprising was unsuccessful as the forces of the ruling class suppressed the peasants with brutality. The Outbreak is the 5th of 7 prints about the peasant war in Germany, 16th century. The peasants group are at the right. On the left, they rush and attack their oppressors with crude weapons. The dark woman in front is the leader and the conscience of the group. Her upraised arms incite action. Her bony, twisted hands and arms document the harshness of life. And her stark blacks and whites convey the emotional moment. Fit for active service. Exposed the German doctors and officers who sent elderly, sick, or very young men to fight for Germany near the end of World War I. Grosz used his pen to depict smug, laughing faces of the officers, soldiers at attention, their seams lining up with the floor and the window frames symbolizing conformity. The doctor's happy he's found another body for the front lines, factories belching out machinery of war, and the skeleton seems most human. It is rounded and detailed. This is George Grosz, Fit for Active Service, 1918, pen and ink. This is John Hartfield, Gearing the Executioner, Germany, 1933 photo montage. Cover for AIZ magazine for 1964. Goring the Executioner. In his photo montage, combining and manipulating news photographs and drawing, the subject is Field Marshal Hermann Göring of the Nazi Party. Hartfield depicts depicts the Nazi field marshal as a butcher to forewarn the public of the bloodshed that was to come. John Hartfield dedicated much of his art to exposing and condemning the horrors of Nazi Germany. Born Helmut Hetzfeld. Hartfield's method of Göring's portal includes increasing the thickness of Göring's neck, emphasizing aggressiveness, displaying the burning Reichstag, likely perpetrated by the Nazis. Black and white elements are giving an unvarnished, blunt quality, and the meat cleaver and stained apron warnings of Nazi bloodshed. So compare David Alfaro's Siqueiros, Echo of a Scream, with Pablo Picasso's Guernica. Echo of a Scream is a response to the horror of the Spanish Civil War. Siqueiros' symbols, screaming helpless child amid the destruction of warfare, represents humanity. The repeated large detached crying child's head depicts the pain of unseen victims, and the dark tones add a somber note to the ugly surroundings. Urbanization, industrialization, and endless piles of waste are the result of progress. This is 1937 Mexico. Siqueiros was a was a Mexican citizen who fought in Spain against the fascists and their Nazi backers. It's really good. Elegy to the Spanish Republic is part of a series of paintings mourning the loss of liberty in Spain after the fascist victory. This is Robert Motherwell, 1953 to 54. Motherwell believed abstraction universally communicated the struggle between life and death, freedom and oppression. The large size of the painting makes these struggles seem monumental. This work was part of a series that contained 115 paintings in which the artist expresses his mourning over the loss of liberty in Spain after the fascist forces were victorious during their civil war. Motherwell was influenced by the surrealist process called automatism, which incorporates intuition, spontaneity, and the accidental when creating artworks. Similar to this is abstract expressionism style. His black and white form suggests bull testicles, leather barrettes of the Guardia Civil, and the living forms crushed by the black hands. Woman with colloidal scars. From a series of photographs of victims of the bombing of Nagasaki, Tomatsu's photograph is technically beautiful with a full range of deep blacks and contrasting with the bright light casting shadowy textures of the scarred skin of the face. This powerful view of the twisted neck gives us a lasting impression of Senji's lifelong suffering. This is Gelatin Silverprint, 1962. This series was meant to document the past horrors and to protest U.S. troops stationed in Japan for decades. This powerfully disturbing photograph is one of a series that exposes the mutilation of victims who survived the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, Japan at the end of World War II. Leon Golub, Mercenaries, USA, 1976, acrylic on canvas. Mercenaries 1 shows two guns for hire, exposing thugs who use brute force to bolster a repressive government. Flattened figures against a flat background, figures pushed aggressively to the foreground. Viewers are dwarfed by the 11-foot painting. Viewers share the same perspective as the victim, so it's that big. Thick paint has been scraped off and the surface elements seem raw. It looks raw. The victim has no identifying traits. Flesh looks repulsive on the mercenaries and victims. Colors are jarring and kind of acidic. Golub worked with news photographs and insisted his images realistically report atrocities were occurring regularly. This is at the Broad in LA. Fighting for the oppressed. Artists who fight for the rights and affirm the values of repressed people use several strategies to make their points forceful. This is Delacroix, Liberty Leading the People, France, 1830, in the Louvre, oil. They use beauty, they use illustration, they use narrative, they use humor, and they use shock. Most social protest works are designed to affect public consciousness rather than to prescribe specific changes. Strategies for protesting oppression. Beauty and excitement can be very effective in protest art. In Liberty Leading the People, liberty has been personified as a partially nude woman, reminiscent of a Greek goddess. Energized, oblivious to danger, she carries a rifle and the flag of the French Revolution. This painting is an homage to the Paris Revolt in 1830. Delacroix's painting mixes elements of realism, idealism, and romanticism. Compare these works. So, 1910 photograph, University of Maryland Library, College Park. A direct way to make social protest art is to illustrate the oppressive situation. Lewis Hine photographed miserable labor conditions in slum housing in the United States, known for exposing child labor in mines and textile mills where children were doing the lowest paying, most tedious jobs. A young boy who dodges under textile looms to pick up loose thread spools. Hine's composition emphasizes large scales of the weaving machines that dwarf the child. A child very young and apprehensive, a gloomy, littered atmosphere. And his images were published in magazines changing public opinion and policy, where child labor was eventually outlawed in the 1930s. Jacob Lawrence, number 36, during the Truce Toussaint, is deceived and arrested by Leclerc. Leclerc led Toussaint to believe that he was sincere, believing that when Toussaint was out of the way, the blacks would surrender. 1937 to 38, Tempera on Paper. Jacob Lawrence recounted the accomplishments, challenges, and oppressions of the African community uprooted to the Western Hemisphere by slavery. Lawrence created 41 paintings between 1937 and 41 about Francois Dominique Toussaint L'Ouverture, a slave who led a revolt in Haiti that resulted in the abolition of slavery there in 1794. Hans Hock's Metromobilitan is just art designed to raise social consciousness. Hock was advocating for Native Africans in South Africa who were politically and economically repressed under apartheid, a system of legal racial separation. This is 1985. Corporations profited from apartheid, including Mobil Oil, who sold supplies to South African military and police. Mobil provided major financial backing to the Metropolitan Museum in New York City to mount a blockbuster exhibition entitled Treasures of Ancient Nigeria. Metromobilitan raises awareness of the often hidden ways that one's country's culture and economy can profit from an unjust situation. Edward Kienholz, The State Hospital, 1966, mixed media. This is made in Stockholm. Shocking ugliness can be used in the service of protest art. The State Hospital criticizes the way society deals with incompetent people. The patient is completely isolated and has no life beyond this room. To protest against society's treatment of people it deems incompetent, Kienholz's installation exposes the neglect and filth he found in a state mental hospital. Kienholz's props are actually institutional objects. The strongest impact comes from the patient's body. The bony knees, the sagging exposed genitals, and the leathery skin. Kienholz drew on his experience as an employee in a mental hospital where he saw a staff member repeatedly hit a patient in the stomach with a soap bar wrapped in a towel so there would be no surface bruises. Sildo Mireles, Insertions into Ideological Circuits, the Coca-Cola Project, is a response to Brazil's military government, which supported itself by selling the country to foreign investors, mostly from the United States. The natural environment, the cultures of the indigenous people were being destroyed, and art openly critical of the government was repressed. Sildo Mireles took empty Coca-Cola bottles, screen-printed subversive messages on them, and returned them for refilling. Using Coca-Cola bottles as vehicles for political messages was clever in many ways. Because Coca-Cola is everywhere, there's an existing system of reusing the bottles, and it's a symbol for U.S. culture. Smart. Sun-Made Raisins. Sun Mad, 1981. Esther Hernandez. Humor is another strategy for effective protests. Sun Mad takes imagery from commercial culture and subverts it. Raisin growers used insecticides contaminating the groundwater the local population used for drinking and bathing. Esther Hernandez changed the image of healthy eating into a message of death. Hernandez chose an art form that allows her to reach many people just as advertising does. This work exposes the dangerous chemical pesticides that are used in vineyards to grow grapes that eventually become raisins. Yinka Shonabar, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews Without Their Heads, 1998, wax print cotton costumes on mannequins, dog mannequin, painted metal bench, and rifles. This is in Ottawa. Historical quotes, clothing, and humor are used to protest the colonial past in Mr. and Mrs. Andrews Without Their Heads by artist Yinka Shonabar. The aristocrats are headless, recalling the fate of the ruling class during the French Revolution, and the printed cotton cloth with which Mr. and Mrs. Andrews are wearing is associated with African culture. Shonabar has created a 3D parody of the famous 18th century painting in which the landed gentry show off their estate. The artist shows that cultures are intertwined and many people may like the idea of cultural purity. It does not exist. The connection is Shonabar has based his sculpture on the 18th century painting by British artist Thomas Gainsborough. Kara Walker, They Was Nice White Folks While They Lasted. She's out right now. She's pretty profound. She creates life-size cutouts and silhouette figures based on racist imagery on the slave era in the United States. The imagery is based on fact and fantasy. They was nice white folks while they lasted, says one gal to another. Cutouts are enhanced with projections in darkened galleries. The cutout life-size figures based on literature about the slave era in the United States have had both positive and negative responses. Walker makes these images because they are controversial and should be discussed. Affirming the values of the oppressed. When a group of people are oppressed, their way of life tends to be discounted or ridiculed. Art is an especially effective tool for affirming the lifestyles and values of downtrodden groups. This is Ambrogio Lorenzetti, Allegory of Good Government, the effects of good government in the city, in the country, and in the country. This is Italy in the 1300s. It's a fresco. Sala della Pace, Palazzo Pubblico, Siena, Italy. Ambrogio Lorenzetti showed how common citizens prosper when justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude reign, and he represented by allegorical figures in the fresco Allegory of Good Government, the effects of good government in the city and in the country. In a climate of security, businesses flourish, culture thrives, and the fields are fruitful. This is Hans Holbein, the Younger. Jean Dentiville and Georges de Selve, the Ambassadors, 1533, oil. In Northern Europe, power was concentrated in religious and secular rulers, but absolute authority was being questioned, and the worth of the individual, or humanism, was being developed. Hans Holbein the Younger painted the portraits of Jean Dentiville and Georges de Selve. Dentiville was a political leader and de Selve a religious leader. Both were fervent humanists. Some of the items on the table reflect their interest in the culture, the arts, mathematics, astronomy, the emphasis on learning rather than authority. Symbols of discord are present. A broken lute strings allude to tensions between church and state. The long stretched shape of the bottom at the bottom becomes a skull, a symbol of death. The Codex Barbaconus, early 16th century. This is the Quetzalcoatl and the Teotihuaca. Paint on vellum, Aztec. Art can affirm art can affirm the history and culture of a people, even as that culture is being attacked and eradicated. The Aztec Codex Barbaconas is a religious calendar that was made during the period of the Spanish conquest, either just before or just after the fall of the Aztec Empire. The Codex Barbaconas and the handful of other manuscripts that have survived from this era preserve the pre-Columbian culture. This image depicts calendar glyphs surrounding the large images of two gods, Quetzalcoatl, light and sun, and Tetzalcoatl, moon and destruction. Excuse me. This is the Aboriginal Memorial, Australia, 1988. Aboriginal artists have used art to affirm their cultural values, which have been suppressed by Australians in European descent. 43 artists collaborated to make the Aboriginal Memorial. The work is composed of 200 logs, one for each year of settlement, hollowed out as traditional Aboriginal coffins. These memorials are for Native peoples who died as a result of European settlement and were never given proper Aboriginal mortuary rites. Artists painted the logs with their important clan Dreamtime symbols, affirming traditional Aboriginal culture. Papan Osorio's mixed media installation, The Scene of the Crime, Whose Crime? This is 1993 to 99, mixed media, affirms the worth of Puerto Rican culture in New York while protesting how the people are depicted in mass media. He has recreated a typical Puerto Rican house, cluttered with kitsch statues, inexpensive religious objects, plastic plants, sentimental family photos, trophies, and covers of TV Guide. Only if you can understand that it has taken years of pain to gather into our homes our most valuable possessions, but the greater pain is to see how in the movies others make fun of the way we live. Mona Hatoum, Light Sentence, Palestine, England, 1992. This is in Paris. Mona Hatoum, an artist of Palestinian descent, has lived in London since 1975 and was forced to flee the fighting in Beirut. Her work, Light Sentence, deals with personal identity, the body, surveillance, and control. The swinging bulb is like prison searchlights, implying surveillance. The lockers should hold private possessions safely, but everything is exposed. The wire boxes suggest animal cages in a laboratory or the oppressively uniform low-income high-rise housing. Light Sentence reveals the instability that those without power endure. Questioning the status quo. Status quo is the existing state of affairs, which appears natural instead of constructed and evolving. Artists often take a critical look at the normal, at underlying and ingrained systems, beliefs, and ways of operating within that culture. This is William Hogarth, Breakfast Scene, Oil on Canvas, 1745. So William Hogarth satirized the English upper classes in a series of paintings called Marriage à la Mode, a comedy mixed with criticism and condemnation. The series ends miserably with infidelity, scandal, and death by duel. Hogarth's paintings were turned into inexpensive prints that were enormously popular among the English middle class. Magdalena Abakanowicz, Bax, Poland, 1976 to 82. 80 pieces of burlap and glue, each over life size. Magdalena Abakanowicz's backs consisted of 80 slumping hollow backs, more than life-size, but without legs, heads, and hands. Backs alludes to the human condition in times of great distress. The artist suggests in this installation the modern malaise of uniformity and the loss of self and individuality. Fibers were pressed into the mold so that each back is similar to the others. Degrees of individuality emerge in the twist of the fiber and slight variations created as each back was removed from the mold. The fibers resemble wrinkled skin, knotted muscles, and visceral tissue. Their organic quality emphasizes our physicality and our ties to the natural world. The weary backs also suggest endurance, strength, and survival. Jenny Holzer. Love her. 1989, LED electronic signs in the Guggenheim. She focused on beliefs widely accepted in the U.S. today. In untitled selected writings, Holzer wrapped electronic signs around the spiral interior of the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. The phrases seem familiar, but they sound contradictory or even idiotic. They're about how we drive ourselves crazy with a million possibilities that are half correct. Protect me from what I want, written in a culture where money can buy almost anything. The electronic signs flash words like a mass media stack, and then they quickly slip away almost before we can grasp them. The sheer number of phrases, the speed at which we see them, and their contradictory messages destroy thought. Art versus politics. Art often pokes fun at the political status quo. The political cartoon has a long history of challenging political and society in Western nations. This is the Legislative Belly in France. It's a lithograph by Honoré Daumier. In France, he was known for his pointedly satirical caricatures. It's a French word, the caricature. Until a government crackdown outlawed works like the Legislative Belly. Today, this is commonplace in every newspaper and many magazines. Portrait of George by Robert Arneson is a bust of George Moscone, a popular mayor of San Francisco who was assassinated. Portrait of George departs from the status quo of bland bronze portrait heads and political leaders. This sculpture is irreverent, colorful, and very large. It was officially removed from the Civic Center after 1 week because the pedestal was deemed crude and inappropriate. The work was later sold to a private collector. William Kentridge, drawing from Mine, South Africa, 1991. William Kentridge's charcoal drawings and film animations are based on the causes and injustices of apartheid. Kentridge's art points out the moral difficulties that attend all instances of power, ownership, and oppression on a grand scale. This is 1994, Miguel Antonio Bonilla, The Knot, from El Salvador. I love that. This looks like Magritte. The Knot by Miguel Antonio Bonilla depicts two ominous figures that represent the country's police and politicians. Ah, okay. The knot that connects them appears made of two elongated phalluses. Bonilla refers to the chauvinism in his culture that allows factions to oppress others and also cause domestic violence. Bonilla took a political risk in this painting because of its criticism of the political status quo. He also took artistic risks, making the painting purposefully ugly and shocking. The style of this work was contrary to prevailing Salvadoran aesthetics for painting at that time. The Shibboleth, an installation by the Colombian artist Doris Salcido. She created a 548-foot-long crack in the floor, very thin at first, but opening larger. The work is about belonging versus outsider status. Salcido has said that the work was about the divide between races and social classes. This was in 2007. All right, that's it.